Why is it that sciatica can be so confusing? Sometimes it's relieving sitting, sometimes it's relieving standing. Different people have different experiences and different advice. In this video, we're going to talk about why one of those is a lot worse than the other from a prognosis point of view, and why that is and what you can do about it. And first off, let us know in the comments, have you had sciatica before? Which one helped you? Did you find that sitting down, leaning over, opening out those spaces on the back relieved the pain of sciatica, and as soon as you got up, the pain came straight back on? Or are you someone that found getting up and walking around was a little bit easier? Let us know in the comments what you found and how it progressed as you got better. We put these videos out to help as many people as possible, so if you find this video helpful, give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel and share it with someone that you know that may be struggling as well. Now let's get into the content of this video. I thought it'd be helpful first and foremost to really throw a spanner in the works and draw the comparison between sciatica and a broken arm and how these two really need to be understood to effectively understand sciatica and what we're going to talk about for the rest of this video. You have a broken arm. It's broken, it's here, this is what is causing your arm pain. Sciatica would be the comparison of arm pain rather than the broken arm. Something has to cause sciatica. You can't have a sciatica the same way you can have a broken arm. Something is there that is putting pressure on those sciatic nerve roots, putting pressure on those particular nerves and giving you that pain. So understanding what that something is that causes your sciatic pain is really the fundamental point, the fundamental starting point that you need to be at in order to appreciate what we're going to talk about throughout this video and better understand your pain, your symptoms, and ultimately what you need to do to get better. If we continue along the lines of the arm pain, if I have arm pain and it's down to a broken arm, I'm going to approach that very differently to if it's down to a muscle strain, even though the pain may be in the same region. And that's why understanding what is causing your sciatica. Is it a disc bulge? Is it a degree of stenosis? What's caused the stenosis? Is it a facet problem? We won't get into all the different things that can cause sciatica in this video. We've got so much content on our YouTube channel to help you understand that in much more detail. But we are going to go through the implications of these injuries with a few choice examples. Let's kick things off by going through it on the spine. First and foremost, the sciatic nerve gets its nerve roots from this lower lumbar section. It's the L4-5 and L5-S1 region. There are some other nerves that go and contribute to it, but this is the site at which it can most commonly be injured, the area that's causing the symptoms, if you will. It's that broken arm example that we mentioned earlier. Now it could be a disc injury down here that's putting direct pressure on the nerve. It could be a disc injury that's not putting direct pressure on the nerve but driving more inflammation into this finite space here. And that's what's putting pressure or irritation of that nerve root and giving you the symptoms that can go a varying degree down the leg. Now they can sometimes go to the buttocks, they can sometimes go to the hamstrings, they can go further down the leg and into the big toe or into the side of the foot, depending on which specific nuanced part of a nerve is being irritated. But we really want to understand what's going on in this region to better understand how we can get it better. And answering that very first question that we spoke about in this video, what's better, sitting down or standing up? Now it's worth addressing that true sciatic pain or sciatica is when the entire nerve is painful, so to speak, or the distribution of the entire nerve all the way down. You can almost trace it like a pencil, but quite often, and for the broadness of this video to help you in the best possible way, people will just call it sciatica if it goes into the buttocks or it goes into the hamstrings or it goes into the calf or some or more or less of those symptoms. And that really is the best and most helpful way, because whether it is true sciatica, that linear pain down the leg along the course of that sciatic nerve, or it's some amalgamation of those symptoms that I mentioned before, it's always going to come from that same common origin. It's just that there's a different degree of severity occurring in this particular injury. So we need to have that in mind, because fundamentally that makes these principles in this video applicable whether it is buttock pain or whether it is buttock and hamstring pain or whether it is that lancinating pain going down the back of the leg. Let's start off with sitting down. So as we sit down, you'll notice that there are these little nerves that come out of these holes. These holes are bony canals, but with the mechanics of sitting, especially when we lean forwards, we make those holes larger, as you can see on the spine here, and that creates more space. Now, it's important to know that nerves run all through our body in all sorts of different areas, and they have contact. They're in contact with a bone, they're in contact with a muscle. Maybe they're compressed between two muscles as they run down our leg or through our arm or wherever it may be. So these nerves aren't somehow needing to float in some gravityless, non-contact environment through our body. They're used to being touched by other things. The problem arises when they're pressed up against another structure. So if that disc, for example, is bulging out through and it's driving that nerve into the back of this bony canal, then that's going to give us symptoms. But if it's just popped out and there's plenty of space, for example, because you've leaned forwards and made the hole bigger, then that might alleviate the pressure on that nerve. We'll come back to the problems that this has a little bit later on in the video, but now at least you understand why it feels better. Now if we get on to why standing might be relieving, well, invariably it's standing and moving around. It's a little bit of ambling. We say to so many people with back pain, you should be walking around a little bit. That's not a hike, that's just a little bit of movement around the house. Because in that upright position, those little bits of movement help with the drainage from this area. So if we've got excess inflammation building up in and around these nerve exit points, then by moving around, we're going to create the environment for drainage of that excess inflammation and decreasing the pressure in that same hole. You might be wondering why I've got a balloon here. Well, I'm using this. Imagine this is a water balloon. It's full of air, but it'll do the example just fine. Now, when we've got a finite hole, a space here, there's a certain amount of pressure here. And if we suppose we had, I don't know, let's take a little pen here. This is your sciatic nerve root, okay? Now, if we make the hole smaller, it increases the pressure on that particular nerve root. What can we do to make that less? Well, we could make the hole bigger, and now that nerve root has plenty of space. You can see the difference in terms of how much it's pressed in there. That's an important principle to bear in mind. If we take the example of sitting down and that being relieving, as we sit down, we've got that pressure on the nerve, it's really hurting, that sciatica is going crazy. And as we flex forwards, like we saw earlier with the spine, we open up that space, and now that little nerve isn't squashed as hard, as aggressively against the walls of that bony canal, and that relieves the pain. The second point is the example of standing up and we're moving around. So we had a lot of inflammation in this particular space, and as we start to move around, we get rid of some of that excess inflammation. Some of that excess fluid starts to go away, and as it goes away, the hole essentially is occupied by less. Now that's a little bit more difficult for me to explain with this balloon or demonstrate with this balloon, but it has the effect of decreasing, going from a lot of pressure in there. As we drain some of this fluid, the pressure comes off that particular nerve. So those are the two ways in which, with a bit of a visual example, hopefully that makes sense for you with regards to how the pressure comes off the nerve in those two seemingly opposing scenarios. One of the reasons standing might well be painful is because, unfortunately, those discs are load-bearing structures, and if they're significantly injured in a certain manner, then you're going to be standing, putting pressure on those tissues, and there's going to be that inflammatory reaction. Maybe there's that bit of disc or bit of facet change that's putting a bit of pressure on that nerve, like we discussed in the balloon example, and that can make things worse. It's just a fact that the injury is so bad there that it's creating pressure, creating irritation and building up inflammation. The other thing to bear in mind is when we are stood up straight, we have a slightly smaller space here. So we have a normal size space, and the act of moving over to that sitting down position makes that hole larger, so the inflammation that's built up while we're standing and doing things has started to become too much, and when we sit down, the hole gets larger, so the pressure comes off. That's why standing can give you the pain, or moving around can be problematic, especially if there's a degree of instability there, maybe with repeat occurrences, doing exercises like knee hugs, which create instability in the ligaments that support these segments. When we get onto sitting, unfortunately, that is a lot worse. And the big reason here is because as you sit down, and you invariably sit down and lean forwards, and we make this hole larger, we're stretching all of the structures that provide stability to this part of the lumbar spine. We're stretching those discs. Maybe the disc is bulged. Well, when the disc becomes bulged, that's because the ligaments have been stretched beyond their acceptable range, and parts of the disc has sort of seeped through some of those cracks. That's a very colloquial way of saying it, but hopefully that gets the point across. And by stretching it further, although we create the hole, an enlarging of the hole, we end up stretching those tissues that are trying to knit back together to provide integrity. And I mentioned just a moment ago, things like knee hugs being things that will destabilize these segments. Well, so is sitting slumped forwards. It drives more pressure through the front of that disc, and that creates problems. If, for example, this was that bulging disc or herniated disc or strained disc or even just a degenerate disc, and we decide to squash on the front, it's bulging out backwards this side. Well, that's going to be the back as you're sat slumped, leaning on your knees to try and provide some relief. Instead of having equal pressure through the disc, we have that real compression on the front, driving things out in that direction. That is not a good idea. And the biggest problem, you've probably guessed it by now with regards to which one is worse, is that position, if that's the only relief you've got, you're in a position where you're making it worse in the only position that is comfortable. And that is a real challenge. Quite often people get themselves caught up into these positions because when it wasn't so bad, it's just built up as a practice, it's built up as a practice, it's built up as a practice. And that leads them to getting into these positions when actually if 6 months ago, 6 years ago, 3 weeks ago, we'd been much more aware of this upright position, we wouldn't have that excess buildup of inflammation in those enlarged spaces. That means that even by coming back to neutral, all that inflammation just gets squashed down onto that nerve and creates that terrible pain. It's something that you will have to move past and do your best to do that. And there are so many tools out there, like in the BIS program, where it can support you going through these steps to make the decision to start to improve the health of your lower back and the health of the tissues that are responsible and injured causing that sciatica. So hopefully by now you've already got it. Sitting is the worst variation here. It lends itself to allowing things to get worse and getting you caught more and more into that entrapment where you can't get up and do anything. If you're one of the lucky ones where standing is actually relieving, then that's great for you. And you can get on with something like the Back and Shape program to start to strengthen those tissues, provide protection for that lower back while it's starting to heal and your sciatica is resolving. And as you do get stronger, that healing process will set in and the things really, really will start to strengthen up effectively. And if you are one of the more unlucky ones, sitting is the only way you can get that relief, then you'll definitely benefit from the material in Back in Shape. That way, you can start to understand and have a bit of faith in a process that's going to get you back on your feet doing these things. And it'll be baby steps, but at least you'll have the right understanding that's based on anatomy and what's actually going on in the spine and the reassurance that it is the right thing. Because people are often, in a lot of cases, once it's explained to them, actually, do you know what? This is why it's so difficult for you to stand up, and this is why it's bad for you to remain sitting. They will be willing to go through a little bit of discomfort as long as they know it's worth it and it's doing the right thing and actually going to ultimately get them better. So slowly working, if you're one of the ones that can only sit down, to start to even be able to lie flat on your back again and then do the things like the towel exercise, you'll start to see those improvements anyway because you weren't able to do it before. And then after a week or so, you're able to start doing that, maybe even lie close to flat. And then you're able to do something like the towel. And if you're wondering what on earth is this towel, there's probably a card up here or up here where you can click a link and learn a little bit more about it. But you'll start to see those little improvements and then we'll get you up walking around again and all those other sorts of things. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of inspiration. So it's not all doom and gloom, there's plenty you can do, but you can only start making the right decisions if you've got the right education and understand why you're supposed to do what you're doing. The Back and Shape program is free to join. There'll be a link up here, probably in the description as well. Click it, go and have a look, start to digest some of the material, understand a little bit more about your back, what and how you should be doing these new exercises, and ultimately that is what will get your back in shape for good in a very, very surprising timescale. If you did find this video helpful, then consider giving it a thumbs up as we mentioned at the start. If you like these sorts of videos and want to stay up to date with our YouTube channel, then do hit the subscribe button to make sure you are notified. You can hit that little notification bell as well, as you've probably seen in countless other thousands of YouTube videos. That notification bell lets you know when we release another video. Until then, have a great day and thanks for watching this video. If you want to learn more about the premium Back in Shape membership, there's going to be a video somewhere underneath here. And if you want to stay up to date or tune in to some of our more recent live streams and the Q&As at the end of those, then that's going to be down here. And remember, you can subscribe to the channel up here and hit the notification bell to make sure you know when we next go live so you can join us for our next live stream and Q&A.